Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rasha's World. Happy New Year to everyone. And we have a special edition today and a special guest, Marilyn Wooley. Welcome to Rasha's World.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. And one of the things I like to ask all my guests here is to briefly introduce themselves in a few words in any way they see fit.
Okay, I'm a psychologist, licensed psychologist in California, and I've been doing this kind of work for about 40 years. Had a lot of experience with a lot of people. I enjoy my work very much. People, say, when are you going to retire? I don't think ever. And so I've done a lot of work with trauma um, since the beginning of my career. And I was kind of inspired by my grandfather, who was one of the liberators of Dachau prison camp during World War II, and just finding out what happened to him. And I talk about that in How Heroes Heal, which is my book, just kind of changed my life, gave me new insight on the whole area, whole study of trauma. So that's kind of where I am. And I work mostly with first responders. So, and I get lots of funny stories.
Yeah, yeah. And so the book is, just to remind everyone, is How Heroes Heal, Stories of First Responders and the Journey from Post-Traumatic Stress Injury to Post-Traumatic Growth. And so you talk also about your grandfather in it, and it's really devastating to hear the story because yeah, he used to be a jovial, happy fellow and then went to war. And maybe you can briefly touch upon that for our listeners here.
So, in looking through what happened was I didn't know any of this. He was like a lot of people coming back from war; they don't talk about it.
Mhm.
So I knew nothing of this until after my dad died, and I found the trunk in the attic, and it was all full of all the pictures, notebooks, letters, hundreds of letters that he wrote, and then I just started reading and putting things together. And from what I could tell he went to West Point, and from what I can tell from the information I got from there, was that he was this happy jokester guy.
Mhm.
And what I knew about him, he was just angry and bitter and isolated and not having a good life at all. So what I started putting together was that when I found the letter that he wrote to my grandmother. And it's pretty much, took a little trip down to Dachau today, and it described the 50 boxcars of bodies they couldn't get to in time. So there is, guilt and shame,
Mhm.
and it just transformed him. And thereafter, you could see in his letters kind of the deterioration of his personality.
Mhm.
And he didn't trust anybody. He didn't trust the government. He didn't trust, and my grandmother was a very social woman. So that was kind of a conflict with them, that he just wanted to sit in this little bunker kind of room in the basement of their beautiful house. And he would go down there and just kind of disappear. So he was isolated. And so I didn't really know him as a grandfather, like, your grandfather going out
Mhm.
and, playing with you or, having fun with you. He was just very grouchy guy.
Mhm.
So it's really hard. I mean, reading all that stuff, it took me a lot to kind of go through it and try to process it. And but the good thing about it was I was working at the VA hospital with Vietnam vets at the time, and it was before the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder had come out. And I got it. It's like I went back to the the Holocaust Museum, and what you do is you open this elevator to the fourth floor, and the elevator doors open, and there's this huge picture of the GIs looking in, and they all have 1,000 mile stare. And I swear to God, it was like a light bulb went off. This is what happened to my grandfather, that he just looked into that horrible scene and it transformed him. So that was kind of what transformed me into being really interested in this.
And what upsets me, it seems common sense from our perspective that yes, there was trauma and this changed the person, but at the time they saw it as a disorder. And it seems the most normal way of responding to abnormal and atrocious events. And so
Absolutely.
I'm strongly against war, and in any way, sometimes it's necessary, and we know, but the horrors of war is awful. And but at the same time, I'm fully supportive of veterans, and I don't think they get the necessary recognition and that they should, and that
It's
actually
getting
expands to first responders across the board as well.
Yes, it's getting better.
Mhm,
We're learning more and more about it, and we're learning more and more how to treat it and to see it. You know, we're calling it post-traumatic stress injury. That's not the official diagnosis of the DSM, which is the diagnostic
mhm,
manual. But
mhm,
you know, people who work with veterans and first responders, we're calling it an injury now because it's an injury. It's something that happened to you.
mhm,
It's not something that was in your head and was dysfunctional. It can become that way.
mhm.
You can, you know, you develop depression, anxiety, avoidance, you know, changes your personality, makes you doubt yourself and feel like you know, did something wrong. And you know, that's typical. I think my grandfather felt that way, even though he had nothing to do with it. So
It- and there's so much stigma too that we have, and even myself, I work with RCMP officers. I was teaching them English, and I was afraid of police officers, and so when they also come in the uniform, I was like intimidated, and they would ask me if they could be absent. I said, "You can do whatever you want to do." I mean, it's that kind of fear. But then once I connected with them, they have a great sense of humor, which they can't show at work. This is not the side we get to see. And so, in comparison with like firefighters, they're often seen as heroes and they're celebrated. Whereas police officers, you don't go and wave at them. You kind of try to hide away. And even if you haven't done anything, it's that kind of like sense we get. So I feel bad for them, especially when I got to hear their stories of the type of work they do and the type of people they have to deal with on a daily basis. I say, no wonder they get paranoid and they're worried. And when we go to a place, they look for the exits. It's like, okay, this is the exit. If anything happens, that's the path we're gonna take. As it just relax, you know. But we have to recognize that, I think, as a society.
we hire them to be police officers and we expect them to be social workers.
Yes,
And
yes,
you know,
exactly,
in a way they
exactly.
have to be. They, you know, there's all kinds of issues about do they need more training with that, and probably yes, because that's what they do. But you know, it's kind of an impossible job.
And they can't show any weaknesses or vulnerabilities and saying, well, this was tough, this affected me. And because they are supposed to be strong and tough, our perception of that. And that is very harmful. So I think a lot of them, and that's why you say in your book too, they suffer in silence. And they don't go and seek the help that they need, or they think there's something wrong with them because they're feeling that way, whereas the reaction is perfectly normal under the circumstances.
Well, to give you an example, and I mentioned this in How Heroes Heal, when I was at the VA hospital
Mhm.
and the Vietnam veterans were coming back really struggling and really suffering. And my training was kind of like, oh, they were that way to begin with. I mean, post traumatic stress disorder was not even a diagnosis until 1980. So it wasn't even recognized. So, you know, we've come a long way, I think, that we're at least seeing the biological basis. I mean, that's the thing. It's like we expect them to be strong. And if they were strong and if they were
Yeah,
okay, they wouldn't get this. But it's a
yeah,
biological disorder. It's
yeah.
something that happens to your brain that is rooted in biology. It's like, you know, you don't break your leg because you have a character disorder.
Yes,
You break your
yes,
leg because your leg breaks,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So we're seeing that more, which is
But
really good.
mhm,
And it's kind of incredible just in the space and the time of my career, we've come that far.
mhm,
And sometimes people get grumbly about, well, they're not getting the kind of treatment. And I always look at when I started out, this is the way it was. It was
mhm.
much worse.
And it's the idea of shaking it off, like shrugging it off, and it doesn't work that way. And it's not the strength of character. Well, I'm strong, then I can just get over it. And it sticks with you. And my experience and knowledge of psychology shows us that even minor traumatic events, they still linger within us unconsciously and affect us. And just to give you a silly example in comparison to what we're talking about, we had a heavy snowstorm, and I got stuck for various hours in a different city from work at night. And I was worried because there were no cars, no buses, and I thought I would be stuck there for the whole night. And it was cold, and there was no way out. It was at the bus stop, and it affected me. And then so just recently, yesterday, I went back to work, and I had that lingering feeling of anxiety. And I say this is silly in a way, but it's perfectly natural because I had minor, but I had a traumatic event. And so, and it
Yes.
often also accumulates, especially in jobs where you have to deal with emergencies on a daily basis as well.
Well, until a few years ago, it only when you were talking about workers' comp or something like that, you had to have like an index event.
Mhm.
So show me a first responder that has one index event. It doesn't. They don't exist. They have
Mhm.
hundreds of them, hundreds
Yeah,
over
yeah.
the span of a career, and they can't stop and process each one
Mhm.
as time goes on because they're on to the next call. So
Yeah,
it just
yeah,
builds up and builds up and builds
yeah,
up, and it's cumulative.
yeah. And then it expresses itself in different ways because we're not processing them, we're not dealing with them. We have depression, we have addiction, we have a tendency to commit suicide or suicidality, and so it's really harmful if it's not treated, if there is no release of that accumulated stress.
You wouldn't think of running a marathon on a broken leg.
Mhm, mhm.
It's the
Exactly.
same thing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And so I want to first focus on what would you say, how can we best deal with it? And I'm very excited also to talk about the growth that comes after. And that's kind of also to finish on a really positive note. But in the meantime, let's see, like, what would you recommend? What are the best ways of dealing with the stress? Now, specifically our first responders, but at the same time, it does apply to everyone because we all suffer certain amounts of stress and even trauma, whether it's minor or major, it still affects us in many ways. So, what would be your general tip and advice for our audience here?
well, the first thing that I find helpful is to acknowledge what's going on. And especially with first responders, they don't want to, and
Mhm,
other people don't want to. You don't want to think that there could be something wrong, but just to acknowledge it and reaching out to other people and talking about it. I mean, I think it's really important that you can share that with somebody who understands and somebody who can explain it. I've had people come into my office, and once I explain, look, at this is a biological thing, this is what's going on, they're just so relieved.
mhm.
So that's probably the first thing. The next thing, and we are a herd animal. We need other
Yeah,
people. Think
yeah.
we don't, but we do.
No, we
And
do.
so
Yeah.
being able to be with other people and other people that have similar experiences and can say, look, at there's nothing wrong. I had that happen to me, and I'm okay. So one of the places that I volunteer is called the West Coast Post Trauma Retreat, and that's specifically for first responders in a group setting. And there's other similar programs, but that's the one I'm with. And it really helps to be able to hear other people's stories and know that you're not alone. Because the worst thing for a human is to be alone.
Mhm.
We hate that.
And to think that something's wrong with us, and that kind of lack of confidence that comes with that, and I'm not normal. This is not a normal reaction. And I think we're probably also too much obsessed with normal because I think like, well, I don't consider myself really normal in many ways because of some of the things I say on my podcast, and people can see that. But I'm okay with that because as long as it's not causing harm or suffering, I think it should be fine.
Well, who wants to be normal? I mean, you need to have a little
Sounds pretty
interest.
boring, right? To be normal.
So you want to have a personality.
Mhm, mhm,
But what goes on, and what I see is that I talk about a journey in how
mhm,
heroes heal, and that's really important to me. It's the journey of going. First of all, you don't want to admit it, then you finally admit it, then you meet people who can help you, peers and mentors and teachers, and then you start looking into other aspects. So one thing we do is look at the history of somebody, because one thing we don't know who's going to get post-traumatic stress from any particular incident. Some people do and some people don't.
Mhm.
But we do know that if you've had something in your past that, has embedded itself in your body, emotions, you have those emotions, and so you will react to a similar incident, and it increases the likelihood that you'll get post-traumatic stress. I mean, it doesn't mean that, it can be a real growth experience. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. So what I try and do is connect the dots. When have you felt like this before? And, people will understand. I had the same feeling when I was 6 and I felt abandoned. And, that is what happened. And when you can connect those dots, then it starts making sense. It's like, maybe I'm not so crazy. Because PTS, post-traumatic stress, feels crazy because you're on fight or flight. Your body is on fight or flight, and your brain is telling you, wait, there's nothing going on. But your body is like, I remember this, right? And I
There's a
need.
disconnect that worries us too. We say, why am I reacting to this in this manner? But it has a perfect reason that we're not fully aware of in many ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one thing I try and do.
Mhm.
And there's various techniques we use. EMDR is one technique.
Mhm, yeah.
There's some emotional freedom therapy. I mean, there's other things that we do. Cognitive behavioral therapy is kind of the standard for how we treat this, but there's other things that we do that are very effective. And I just attended a seminar on stellate ganglion block, which is they it's kind of the same thing they use when women have um, C-sections or something,
Mhm.
or they block the
Mhm.
sensation. And so that, as I don't know that much about it, but I was pretty impressed with the presentation, that can help. So that we're finding other things, and we never really knew any of this, and now we're finding all these techniques that it's kind of a global thing, but all these techniques are part of the process.
Yeah.
So as a trauma therapist, you have to have kind of a big library in your head of
Yes.
what you can do, and plus the not only the techniques, but getting people to do other things like exercise, reconnect with their family, do the sports and stuff that they used to do, because a lot of times when you're isolated like that and you're emotionally numb, you don't want to do anything.
Mhm.
So there's all these things to recover that you can do.
Mhm. And
And
it does become a vicious cycle because you're projecting, like your grandfather, you're projecting this aura of like, I'm grouchy, I'm mean, I'm angry, and others will react in the same way. So it keeps getting stronger instead of like opening up or dealing with them and connecting with others. And I think one thing that I was thinking about as I was reading your book is really to listen to others and to see others, not just how we are perceiving them, but kind of through empathy and from their point of view. And so understanding like, okay, this person is angry is not because of me. They don't hate me or they're not angry at me usually. It's because there is something triggering them or going on. So in that way, we can also relax and not be on the defensive and also attack them back, but kind of take it in a stride. And I deal with students, and I do see anger with them because there are feeling and so on. But when I'm calm, it kind of like affects them too, and it does relax them. So it's that power each of us has to both listen carefully, but also not to take it too personally, I think.
yeah, yeah, I have a firefighter that says, I'm out on the front lines of this war with a fire,
Mhm.
and then I go home and the real war begins. It's just
Absolutely.
it's really stressful. I have an interest in wildland firefighters because of where I live. There's wildland fire, and so what they go through is they're out for weeks and they don't see their family, had no contact. The isolation is very difficult. And then they come home and they're like, okay, I'm in charge. And the spouse goes, I don't think so. We've been doing fine without you. you know?
I mean, I'm going to share this, and I hope they're not listening. But these police officers, when I met their wives, I was kind of surprised because they're calling the shots in many cases. And there's this like strong guy that I thought was in control, but no, he's following orders. And so I found that very, very interesting and amusing too. It's not always what we think we see. There's like other dimensions at work.
Well, a lot of the police officers I work with, I mean, they have a crusty exterior, but they're jello, really. I mean, I'm not amazed, but I'm always impressed at how sensitive and, you know, easily hurt they are.
Mhm,
So, and they take it personally when people don't like them.
mhm,
And it's, they're kind of sweet, really.
mhm, mhm. Mhm. And just giving them a chance as like as human beings too. And it's just that uniform that kind of like blocks us off in many ways, I think. And just talking about trauma, I mean, we've experienced now trauma with COVID, and that has been like global trauma. And although trauma is bad and has is harmful in many ways or does not make us feel good, I also see the silver lining there because it's opened up a lot of people to talk about it, even using technology and social media to talk about their struggles. And then others feel kind of invigorated and validated in their own feelings, and they connect with that. And I think that's been a very positive trend that's coming out of something that's really awful.
Yes, I think so. And I think about my family, and we figured out other ways to connect. And I think a lot of what we did made us closer. But it was hard being isolated. I mean, humans don't like to be isolated, as I said, and that's one of the things I talk about in the book too, is that isolation, how heroes heal. That isolation is very difficult. But then then there's the growth part,
Yes.
that what happens is people, and it's not, you don't come by it easily, the growth, the concept of post-traumatic growth, you don't come by it easily. It's not just like, oh, that which doesn't kill you will surely make you stronger. It's really processing a lot of things. And I try to show in the book the people that I interviewed went through such struggles, but they came to the other side of it more connected with their families, and more spiritual, more connected with nature, having a new confidence about themselves. And it's just wonderful to see what they did and how they process it. I think the people in my book, it's kind of like they knew that they couldn't stay in that place. They knew that they had to grow, or their lives were not going to be good. So I was just in awe of all of them.
And just the benefits of suffering. Because when I look back, most of my learning, the learning curve comes from suffering. That's where I've learned the most. And it's kind of like when we say about it's better to have loved and lost than not never have loved at all. And I think that the same kind of applies to suffering, although it's not something we're seeking. But when it comes to us, which is a natural part of life, we need to take advantage of it in many ways because of the growth it brings us. And as you're saying, uh, we live in a comfort zone often and on autopilot, and things don't affect us, and we're just kind of content. But once we experience that, we have a chance of going further, of really connecting with life, with joy, with spirituality, appreciating life so much more. And when you look at it, those people who have suffered come out much stronger, much more resilient, and often in many cases, not always sadly, but much stronger as individuals too, and much happier. And so I think we really have to look at that and see that there is a blessing in disguise there with these horrible things that are happening.
And resiliency is really an important concept.
Mhm,
I mean, people that choose to be first responders tend to be pretty resilient to begin
mhm,
with. Otherwise, I mean,
mhm.
they don't do it.
Yeah.
They have a kind of personality. They tend to be somewhat resilient. They've been through some stuff in the past. They have confidence that they can handle any situation.
Mhm,
And then, of course, when they can't handle a situation for whatever reason, either because it was overwhelming, or they were helpless, or they made a mistake, or something really bad happened, then it just devastates them. And part of this whole process of post-traumatic growth is they have to get past that. They have
mhm,
to relearn that
mhm,
they are good people, that they have control over things, and they want to have, I joke and say they're control freaks. I mean, they are. They're control freaks. I mean, that's their job,
Well, they
right?
have to be. They have to be.
Their job is to control disasters.
Mhm, mhm.
So, when they can't control it, it's really tough on them. But the growth thing is they develop new confidence, which is really important.
Mhm.
When they can see that they can handle things, and they can handle things better than they used to.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. It's a higher plane. It's like our plane of confidence that they have. And you mentioned Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. Can we talk about that a bit too? I really like that.
well, what happened with that was that I was writing, I was doing some other writing,
Mhm,
and I took a class from a guy named Chris Vogel, who is a screenwriter, and he kind of follows Joseph Campbell's journey. And he
mhm.
wrote a book called The Hero's Journey. And I read that, and all of a sudden I thought, wait a minute, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
That's exactly what's going on.
Mhm,
And it's kind of an adventure. It's a deployment to your better health.
mhm,
And so I just started developing it, kind of following it, somewhat loosely, but it's
mhm,
there.
mhm,
This is what happens is that, the call to adventure, the refusal of the call, which they always refuse it at first, the acceptance of the call, um, you know, meeting mentors. And one thing that I kind of find very interesting is that you talk about the hero, the figure to death of the hero, that
mhm,
there's something that changes about them. And that's like when Luke Skywalker was in the garbage disposal,
mhm,
and and they were squishing him, and he disappeared, and they thought he died, and he came, the thing, whatever it was, spit him out again, and he was reborn. And
mhm,
that's it. They're all of a sudden, they're like, wait a minute, I'm going to change. I'm going to be reborn. I'm going to be something better than I was. And it's wonderful to see. So, and, there's more things there, in seizing the sword of knowledge, that's what they do a lot. And then one thing I talk to them about, part of the journey is, the road back.
mhm,
And I say, now you have this knowledge. You, you are not done. You have to pay it back.
mhm. And shedding your skin in many ways, like like a snake, and becoming renewing yourself and becoming a even better person in many ways.
Right. So I have clients that have become mental health professionals, and to help people, to teach people, and they really kind of get into it.
Mhm.
They feel like, I this is something else I can do. I can teach other people.
Exactly, and to pass it on. And what I really like is also it's not one size fits all. So we're looking at different ways of trying to find something that resonates with that person. And I really like that move, because it's like before, it's like usually like, okay, there's one way of doing it, and this is it, and that's the best path. But we don't respond to that in a positive way. So some people need medication, some people don't. Some people need this kind of therapy, some people, and others work better with others. And that openness, I think, is so important.
Well, that's why, as a trauma therapist, you need to have a lot of tricks in your bag.
Mhm,
You
mhm,
need a lot of ways of approaching things. And that's one thing that I appreciate about the field, is I'm always learning. I mean, there's always
mhm,
something
mhm.
else to think about. And I learned so much from the clients too, in this
Yeah,
book. I mean, you know, I think, I'm so grateful that they could tell their stories to me, but I learned so much,
yeah,
from
yeah.
them. And that was really gratifying.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for being on Rash's World, Marilyn Wooley. You're a psychologist, traumatologist, author, and the book is How Heroes Heal: Stories of First Responders and the Journey from Post-Traumatic Stress Injury to Post-Traumatic Growth. Thank you so much for the wonderful work that you're doing and for your awesome book.
Thank you so much for the interview. I appreciate it.
Thank you.